Welcome back to the studio. It's a beautiful winter's day. Unfortunately, we don't have any snow yet, and many of you may know that I love snow, so I'm looking forward to that. We never quite get as much here as I would like. I see some states that get like 60 inches in one day. That's the kind of snow I want. But to keep my spirits bright, I'm going to be working on a Christmas table runner today. This one should be pretty quick because it's pretty small. The pattern I used is called Holly Berry Holiday. And I'm using it for two reasons. One is because it's certainly a winter themed pattern. It's a holly leaf with the berries with a nice little breeze blowing in there. I suppose it could be the vine also. But also because it's fairly new. This is by Kalynda Grant. It was copyrighted in 2020, but we're just getting it posted on the Urban Elements website recently, and I saw it and I really liked it. So that's what we're going to be doing. A table runner is a good example of how you can load the quilt two different ways. Now, whenever we have a table runner, the obvious way that we think about it is loading it this way. But when it comes to a quilt, we often think of loading it where the length is up and down. And this is just a good opportunity to express that you really can load either of these either way. The only difference would be if you were using a edge-to-edge design that was directional. So if you were using something that, for instance, had the words Merry Christmas in it, or something else that needed to be right side up, then obviously you need to pay very close attention to which way you load the quilt, because you don't want the writing to be going up and down the quilt sideways, unless that's what you really want. So it's just an opportunity for you to see that you could load a queen size quilt with the length, the longest side, running horizontally on the frame. And the reason you may do that is because it would be a little bit quicker to sew out. Now, the amount of time it takes to actually stitch over the surface of the quilt will be the same, but where you save time is in rolling up the quilt. If you have the quilt long ways, you may have to roll up the quilt 12 times or 10 times, and rolling up the quilt is where we spend extra time. If you loaded it horizontally, you may only have to roll the quilt 8 or 9 times. And these are just numbers that I'm making up in my head, but it relates to the size of the quilt. So if you could reduce 3 times that you have to roll up the quilt to finish a quilt, that saves you the amount of time it takes you each time. Now, so if that is, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, you could be saving 15 to 25 minutes per time. It's also gives you less opportunity to make a mistake as you're rolling up. So it's just another thing to think about. So whenever you're loading a quilt, you can always factor in whether it's easier for you to do it vertically or horizontally. It also may make a difference in the size of the quilt. If it's super long, it may not fit on your frame, but these are just things to think about. So I'm going to go ahead and load the top of this table runner on. I still have to cut a piece of batting. I'm not very good about sorting my scrap batting. I'm sure in the 3 piles of batting scraps that I have that I could find a piece of batting that would fit this table runner, but I don't have time to go through it today. That's something I need to work on. But I'll ask, how is it that you store your batting scraps? Are you good at reusing your batting scraps? Do you piece them as you're quilting? Do you keep them organized by size, or do you just not use the scraps at all and just factor that in as the cost of doing quilting? So that's just something I'm curious about for you. I always keep my batting size the full size of my backing. That way, as the quilt is rolling up on the edges that are beyond the quilt, those don't start to sag because they don't have the same thickness as the quilt does as it's rolling up on the take-up lever. So I always, for me, factor that the batting requirement is the same as the backing requirement as far as size. That way I don't get any sagging on the two sides, and it's not creating an additional problem down the road. Now, that's the way I do it. But also what I do is I also have some batting scraps that I've saved and I keep here in the studio, so that if somebody gave me a quilt and they gave me the batting and it wasn't the same size as the backing, that I could feed those batting strips in on the two sides to help keep the take-up fullness even on both sides. So that's just a tip if you don't have the backing and the batting the same size. You could always use some of your backing strips, and they don't have to be single layer. You could double layer and triple layer as needed to help take up some of the fullness in the edges of the quilt where the backing is. So that's just an option. One of the other things that I'm going to try to play with today, haven't decided for sure, so we'll know when I get started stitching, is that the machine is set up to use more than one color thread. The spool holder holds 2 cones of thread, and as long as you use a needle with the eye hole large enough to accommodate 2 thread, it should work smoothly. And I say that based on the information, it should work smoothly. I haven't tried it yet, so we're going to try that a little bit today. I may practice on the batting to the side and see how it stitches out, and then either go with it or change my mind. But that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to cut away here, put on the batting, put on my top, and I also have to load the new pattern onto the IQ. When I do that, what I've started doing is I will load the design from my computer. I always change the name and get rid of the inventory control number at the beginning of the name of the pattern. I do that on the screen where I've downloaded it and unzipped it. After I eliminate the inventory control number, I personally add at the end how many inches high it is. So I'll put what is this is called Holly Berry Holiday. I would call it Holly Berry Holiday -10 because this is a 10-inch high design, and then .IQP, which stands for the IntelliQuilter pattern. So once I have that done on the computer, I will copy and paste it onto my USB stick. I bring the USB stick out to the IQ and upload the new design. And then I'm also going to, after that's finished, I'm going to put in my IQ stick back into the IQ and sync the IQ tablet with my IQ stick. What the IQ stick is an additional purchase from IntelliQuilter. When I purchased it, it was around $500 or $600. But it allows me to install this into the computer, and while it's plugged in, I can play with the design on the computer as the whole system. Obviously, it's not going to be running the motors at all because it's not connected. It just allows you to utilize your computer in a more comfortable setting so that you can play with new designs, change designs. You could load the size of a quilt and get things the way you like it and see how it looks. I also like it because I can screen capture from my computer when I'm doing something on the machine, and it allows you to see it much clearer rather than trying to videotape the action on the screen, which is what I have to do when I'm out here actually working on the machine. So I'm going to upload the design, then bring a copy of it back to the IQ stick so that my IQ stick is always current with all of the designs that I have on the tablet would be on the stick as well. So I'm going to be doing all those things. So give me a minute to reset the camera and we'll get things up and running. I have my machine ready to get the thread loaded. I'm going to use a little bit of my silicone on my felt pad. I always like to do that to help the thread feed through properly. I've got I've taken my sole plate off and I've put some oil on the bobbin mechanism because I haven't used my machine in a couple days. And I've got 2 different spools of thread and my thread holder up here. So I'm going to just choose the 2 that are fairly even. And I've got the darker blue Isacord 40 weight on the back right. I'm going to feed it through the back right hook. And now I've got a lighter blue Isacord 40 weight. I'm going to feed it through on the front one. And when I get them over here, I'm going to trim the 2 threads at the same point just to make them a little bit easier to feed through. And then I'm just going to feed them through the rest of the way as a single thread, the way I normally would. And I want to make sure that's feeding nicely. I'm going to go around my sensor wheel that lets me know if there's a thread break twice. I'm going to go through both of my connectors here over the pad. Now I want to make sure that my presser foot is up so that my tension discs are open. But even still, even knowing that they're open, I'm going to hold this thread here taut as I go through the rest of the system, just to make sure that my thread goes into the tension discs. I know that when I first started doing it, I would just feed it through with one hand. Even though the foot was up, it didn't always get in the discs. And I imagine it's a little bit like flossing your teeth. Whenever we floss our teeth, or at least when I do, I have to hold the thread in 2 locations to get it to slide up in between my teeth. And so doing that, I know that I'm getting it in the tension clamps the way it's supposed to. So I've done that now, just that quick to go all the way through. I'm going to trim it one more time to get these even. And get my little mechanism here in order. I know you can't see, but I'm just feeding this through as normal. I do have a 90 needle in, so it should accommodate both of these threads easily. And also what I'm doing is that I'm going to baste the batting down at the top of the quilt, and I'm going to do that with the 2 threads, and that's just another way that I can test to make sure that the double threads is working. And I'm just using 2 shades of blue because it's primarily a blue quilt, and I'm going to pop the bobbin in and we can go ahead and test. I'm down 1 layer already because it's getting warm in here, or maybe it's just me going up and down the stairs. First thing I'm going to do is load my new design onto the IQ. So I'm going to hit load designs. I'm going to hit load. It's asking me to take the tablet off and insert the USB stick. I only have 1 new design in the stick, so it just went ahead and loaded it, and it's finished, so I can pull that out and back up. Now I'm going to hit load synchronize. This time I'm going to hit synchronize. I'm going to insert my IQ stick, and what it's going to do now is sync that new design onto the IQ stick so I keep it current with all the new designs. Okay, it's telling me that it's not syncing, so I'll have to do that later. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back on the bracket, my tablet bracket, and I'm going to go ahead and get ready to sew out my design. But for me to do that, I have to get us back into my start position, and I'm just going to talk you through this a little bit. My design is 86 by 23, so I'm going to hit Design Sew Quilt, Start New. I'm going to replace the work in progress, permanently erase it, and reset my clock. I am using a Pantograph today, and I'm going to enter the rectangle manually. The width is my largest number, and that is 86, with the addition of an inch for each side. And then I'm going to do my height, and my height is 23. I'm going to put 25 just to be sure. And so I have a visual representation on the tablet of my table runner. I'm only going to have to roll up the quilt once. So I'm going to hit Finished. I'm going to go down to my downloads, and the name of the design was Holiday Berry. So I'm going to go right to the H's, and here it is, Holiday Berry, Holiday 10-inch. So I can hit Continue. So I've now brought it in for both my even and odd rows. I'm going to touch the gap just to let this interlock a little bit better. And now I'm going to go to my row height, pattern height. Now remember, it's the pattern height that we're trying to adjust, even though it really is what the numbers you're putting in are adjusting the row height. But I'm looking at the pattern height is what I want to get to. So I'm just going to run my finger at a diagonal until I get this design down to about 10 inches, which is what the designer anticipated. So my row height, which is what it's allowing me to adjust, is 9-inch. The pattern height, which is what I want to adjust, is 10-inch, and that's right where I want it. So it looks like I have about 3 rows to stitch out, and that's perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Finished. I'm going to hit Accept, and now I can go ahead and hit Sew Quilt, and I'm going to select the first pattern to quilt, which is the very top. I'm going to go ahead, the very top was like 2 stitches at the top of the whole run, and probably those were the ones that would be above the actual quilt top anyway. So I'm skipping down to the first full row, and I'm going to hit Continue. I'm going to do Panto Sequencing Assist. I'm going to alternate, and I'm going to tie off at the end and do the whole quilt. That way I don't have to worry about which is the next row. Everything's going to be done for me. I'm going to start left to right. When I get to the right side, I'm going to do right to left. And so this should go pretty quickly. And I'm going to go ahead and hit Sew Quilt. It's going to go to the beginning, the first row. I'm going to move my light out of the way and my handlebar out of the way and get my side lights on, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit Start. knew I was only going to have to roll up one time, and I've just done that in between the first and second row. The second row, the berries were just a little bit too low for me to get this full second row in. So now that I have it realigned, then I can go ahead and finish out the rest of the quilt. The batting and the back top are already pretty far away from the leader, and I didn't pin the bottom of this. I floated this quilt. When I realigned and rolled the quilt up, I went ahead and basted the two sides and the bottom. But one thing that I do quite often, I kind of like it, is I use 505 temporary spray adhesive. Now I know it's a little bit pricey, so I don't like to use it all the time, but sometimes it's like having an extra set of hands. I know that if I can spray it on the backing and then put the batting down and make sure that it's flat, that it's going to be flat when I top stitch it. Likewise, when I spray the batting and smooth the bottom of the quilt out, I know that it's going to be flat when I go ahead and baste the edges. If you have a top that has a lot of personality in it, sometimes the 505 can do a pretty good job of helping to hold all of that excess fabric in place. If you can get it smooth before you stitch it, then if you just run your hand on either side of the quilts as it's going under the machine and add a little bit of tension, you can sometimes work in quite a bit of excess fabric. So I've got that done, and I don't use a lot of it, but I do like it for an extra set of hands and to help with the excess fabric. I have about 46 minutes left. I'm guessing that this probably was about an hour and 15-minute project. I didn't look before I hit the start button. But I'm going to go ahead and restart the machine. I've had one thread break with the dual threads, so I'm not too unhappy with that. It is giving me a much more pronounced design because you have, instead of one 40-weight thread, you have two. So that's one of the reasons why I kind of like it. So I'm going to go ahead and restart the machine and let you watch a little bit, and then we'll get to the next step. Well, I wrapped that one up. Again, the name of this pattern is Holly Berry Holiday, and that is by Kalynda Grant. This is the first time I've used one of her designs. As far as I know, it's a new one that we've uploaded, although it's been copyright since 2020, I believe. So I did the two threads in the top and regular bobbin thread. All of the thread that I used today was Isacord. And so you'll say, Brian, why bother using two threads? Well, there's a couple reasons. First of all, the first one really was curiosity. Basically, the thread's function is to hold the three layers together. And to hold it, the pattern is meant to hold it together frequently enough that it doesn't stress in any one given area when you're pulling up the quilt. or handling it. I don't know if you know this, but the most common wear on any quilt is the binding. And that is why most people use French fold binding, because it has more stretch and give and it lasts longer. But all of the stitching is meant to hold the structural integrity of the quilt together. So the more tightly something is quilted, the stronger ultimately that it's going to be. But you can't go too far. When you're hand quilting, you have to remember that the thread that they use for hand quilting is a single thread, and it loops up and down through the quilt as you're sewing. And the more you handle the quilt that way, the more supple and soft it becomes. Machine quilting is the reverse of that. The heavier you machine quilt something, the stiffer it can become. I'm sure you've seen some art quilts that are so heavily stitched that they become even hard to fold. So there's a little bit of a play in between the structural integrity and then the comfort. So the basic point of the thread is to hold the quilt together. But using two threads, what I did with a 40 weight, it made the stitching more pronounced. Now, if you've watched me before, you know that I don't like the quilting itself to steal the show unless you're doing a whole cloth quilt. I want those two things to work in unison. I think the quilting pattern should be seen when you come up close. It shouldn't be visible from all the way across the room. I always think about it the same as perfume. I don't want to smell someone's perfume the minute I walk in the door. When I'm in their personal space, then I can smell their perfume and tolerate it, but I don't want to smell it across the room. And I don't want quilting to be so intense that it screams at you over top of the quilting pattern. So I think you can still see the quilt piecing pattern here, and upon examination you can see the more pronounced quilting that the double thread gave me. Another thing, or another reason why you might want to do this, and I think many people have come across this at one point in their sewing, is that they don't have the exact thread color that they need. They find one that's a little darker and they have one that's a little bit lighter, but they don't have that exact shade that they're looking for. And by using the two threads together as I did today, a darker and a lighter, you meet somewhere in the middle. It almost is like a twist, because you're seeing glimpses of both the darker and the lighter thread, and it seems to create a mid-ground in the value. So number one was curiosity. I haven't done two threads before, so I did it today. Number two is it made the quilting pattern a little bit more pronounced, which is fine because I don't think it went too far. And number three, it was just an experiment, or to see how to get a thread somewhere in the middle as far as value or color if you don't happen to have one. So those are three reasons why this might be something that you'd want to play with at some point. I'm sure you're curious about things as well. I've been sewing for like since 1991, however many years that is. And so I need things to keep sparking my interest and keeping me occupied, and little things like this help. So I probably will bring you in a little bit closer before I close out, just so you could see the stitching on here. Total time was probably around an hour and 15 minutes. This was a fairly dense pattern. I used 2 3/4 spools of bobbin thread, and then I filled the bobbin one full time, and I used a partial. So for a table runner to use that much thread, it tells me that this is a fairly dense pattern, but it sewed out really beautifully in the end. So I'm not unhappy with that. Only had maybe 2 thread breaks with using the double thread. And also I used a 90 needle so that the eye hole had plenty of room for both of the threads to accommodate through there. And Isacord in the bobbin, Isacord in the top, medium, and then a light color. And I think that's it. I'm going to go ahead and show you what the final piece looks like, and then I'll get this video inside and start editing it so that they can get it up for next week. But if you have a moment, just let me know what you do with all of your excess batting. Some of you may not really have any because you really make the batting fit the exact size as the top, which is not what I do. But for those of you who use extra batting when you're loading the quilt, let me know how you utilize that batting, and other people who will be watching the video as well. So thanks for watching. I'm going to let you come in closer and see this, and then we'll close out. I think you can see, even though we have double thread, the stitching isn't too intense. You can still see the beautiful pieced table runner, and I do have this folded in half so it fits up here on the table. But thanks for joining us this week. We look forward to seeing you again here next time in the studio, and remember to take care of yourself and take care of each other.